delighted to welcome you here today to this session. And together with my colleague, Dr. Erin Young, we run the Women in Data Science and Artificial Intelligence project at the Turing Institute. Our aim today is to have a conversation about the lack of diversity in innovation. And before I introduce my dream panel, and this panel's got so much experience in these areas, we couldn't have a kind of better panel really to discuss these issues. I just wanted to say a very few words. The first thing I'd like to say is that on the table over there, you can pick up our report, which has just come out of our new project, and please get one on your way out. Basically, in this report, we both kind of map the problem, the scale of the problem, and also have recommendations at the end about some possible solutions. And I'm sure some of those will come up in our discussion here. I mean, as we know, venture capital plays a really crucial role in technological innovation. Yet there are few women investors and few women founders, especially in AI. To cite just one figure, less than 1% of venture capital invested in the booming AI software area over the last decade went to female-led startups. We feel that this really shortchanges women and the economy. Women miss out on well-paid, interesting work, good jobs, and the economy misses out on a vast pool of talent. But I also want to stress here that a more diverse workforce and involving a more representative community would actually deliver much better science and technology. And I think we don't really emphasize this enough in our discussions. There's a lot of discussion today about the need for responsible, ethical AI. And we see repeatedly that a lot of the software and the technology that we're getting has got discriminatory and biased effects. And as someone who's been involved in thinking about the gender relations of technology for many, many decades, I can tell you that these issues aren't new. From seatbelts designed for male bodies, to women's health problems being overlooked, to Siri having a female voice, to more recent problems with hiring software, these systems do reflect the people who design and build them. And so we really can't solve these problems without a broader sector of the population being involved in building them, in building our technological world. I don't need to emphasize at an AI conference like this how much technology really infuses our sense of the future, how we think about the future, our images of the future. So I think what is at stake here really is that we're stunting our imagination of future worlds, of a whole variety of different technologies, a whole variety of different possibilities that might actually improve our lives. So I just want to kind of state that out there, and now I'd like to introduce this absolutely marvelous panel, and I'm so grateful that they've all come here. On my left is Louis Taylor, who is the CEO of the British Business Bank. Prior to that, he was Chief Executive of the UK Export Finance for 7 years, and he's also held roles as a Director General in the Department of International Trade, a member of its Executive Committee and Management Board. And the British Business Bank have brought out a series of fantastic reports on diversity that we have used a lot in our work. And I particularly want to mention, which I hope we'll be discussing, a report that came out last year called Finding What Works: Pathways to Improve Diversity in Venture Capital Investment. Dorothy Chow is Director of Policy and Public Engagement at DeepMind. She's spent her career building social justice, ethics, and accountability structures at technology companies, setting an industry standard on how corporate policies affect free expression and privacy online. But she's also herself, I read, an angel investor in Atomico, a European venture capital firm, where a third of founding teams include a female or non-white founder, and nearly 2/3 of its investment teams come from some kind of unrepresented background. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing how this has been achieved. Ladi Greenstreet, we're delighted to have as well. He's a visionary leader at the nexus of technology, business and innovation. He's head of strategic investments for NatWest, where he specialises in investing in growth stage companies. But for our purposes here, it's fantastic that he's here because he is CEO of Diversity VC, a non-profit committed to breaking down identity barriers in venture capital. And again, I need to say that we're always looking at the reports that come out of Diversity VC, and they've been really foundational to our work. So thank you very much for that work. It's been great. So I wondered if I could just begin. I've got some questions I'll follow up with, but I was just going to begin by asking you to talk about how your organisation really is addressing, how you think about these issues, how you're addressing these problems of diversity.
Well, Judy, should I start? That's very kind. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having me here. And just to commend the report that's been published today, which I got a sneak preview of, which I think is just terrific. So the British Business Bank that I represent, we're the National Economic Development Bank of the UK, focused on helping small businesses to get the finance they need to grow. And that's small businesses at a variety of stages. And for the purposes of today, I want to focus on two of our four strategic objectives. One is backing innovation. The UK, it depends on its innovators so much, and making sure that innovative companies get the finance they need is at the heart of what we do at the bank, but equally at the heart is unlocking potential, and that is making sure that entrepreneurs get the finance they need wherever and whoever they are. So, of course, that's a very diversity-focused objective with a regionality element to it, but also a gender and ethnicity element to it as well. And I'm hoping that I can demonstrate to you that we are meeting both of those objectives across the range of our programs in a way that is making progress whilst acknowledging there's so much to do still. So at the very beginning of a business's life, startups, we have a startup loan scheme which provides loans of up to £25,000 to people to start a business. And 40% of those loans, £400 million, has gone to female founders, 20% to ethnic minority founders. And the process for getting a loan is quite numbers driven. It's probably quite AI driven as well. And how we get what is proving to be a pretty diverse, certainly relative to the market, set of outcomes, how we bring that from our startup loan scheme into our more discerning investment processes and squeeze out the unconscious bias, I think is really important, and that's what we're working on. At the other end of the spectrum, the most cutting-edge companies, we have a direct investment program investing in leading-edge companies. It's invested in 18 deep tech and life sciences companies. 4 of those companies, 22%, are led by female founders. 22%, not 50%, but it's 1,000% better than the 2% of money that goes in venture capital that goes to female founders generally. And these are great businesses. I'm thinking of a company like Proximi, which allows surgeons to virtually scrub into an operating theatre, to bring best practice into an operating theatre. I don't know whether you know, but across the UK, there's a 14% variance in the outcome on colorectal surgeries. And trying to close that, just depending on where you are in the UK, trying to close that gap and make sure that we raise the standards. This is the power of the business that Proximi is, and it's led by Dr. Nadine Hajjaj-Haram, who is not only a fantastic entrepreneur, but she is a surgeon at Guy's and Thomas's Hospital as well. Or Oxford Quantum Circuits, which is going to help drive the next generation of AI, led by the inspirational Ilana Wisby. And it's not just those highest tech companies at a later stage. We sponsor a regional angels program, backing syndicates of angel investors in the regions of the UK to invest in earlier stage businesses. And recently, one of the syndicates we backed invested in a company called Low Carbon Materials, founded by Natasha Boulding, who is a PhD from Durham, who, with her founder, were forced to spend 2 weeks at Durham Business School to get some kind of business training, and my word, that inspired them. And they've set up this business to decarbonize to a much greater extent than currently, building materials and construction materials as well, based up in Durham. And then we also, in terms of a regional focus, we've just launched 6 nations and regions investment funds across the UK to focus particularly equity investment outside of this golden triangle of London, Cambridge, Oxford, which gets a disproportionate amount. And one of the first investments of the Investment Fund for Scotland is a company called Carcinotech that 3D prints to pinpoint accuracy cancer tumors with the aim of making clinical outcomes better, planning surgery to remove them, but also driving the research around that in order to make sure that medicines have more impact on tumors from the lab then into clinical as well. So there's a range of programs that we're trying to demonstrate the value that it comes out of investing in diverse founders. And it's not just about me plucking those great examples individually out of the air. There's a bigger movement here as well. And we're signed up to the Invest in Women Code, which is now over 200 investment institutions. We run the venture capital arm of that, committed to bringing more gender diversity into investment mandates. And this works. We published data just 2 weeks ago showing that those who signed up to this code, their investment portfolios are becoming increasingly diverse relative to the market. And so we really want to drive this in our own investment process, making sure the fund managers we work with, including Atomico, although they're right at the pinnacle of in this area, that they are focused on all of this. Which brings me to one of the studies that Judy mentioned, Finding What Works, where we published 3 pathways to help diversify the venture capital industry, starting with recognizing that women invest in women. And the lack of female partners at investment firms is staggering. 98.5%, it says in the report, of VC firms are male-dominated in terms of their senior leadership. And it is no wonder that we have an issue. So the first thing is more female investors. Second thing is be more inclusive in the pipelines. Warm leads get more investment than cold leads. What is a warm lead? You've had some kind of a relationship with the investor. And that's not just on entrepreneurs to build relationships with investors. It's on investors to open themselves up to creating those warm relationships. We have in our nations and regions investment funds, the fund managers there who are feet on the ground, and they've got officers there and people there. They have open surgeries on a Friday morning. Anybody can come along and just talk about their business and just get some pointers, start to build that relationship. And then the third element is about being transparent here. So look, if we can't measure what we're doing and we can't be proud of that and we can't see the progress we're making, we won't make any progress. So look, Judy, I could go on, but I'm not going to. That's enough.
Thank you very, very much. I wonder if I could move on now to Dorothy. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Judy. And I've been lucky enough to wear a number of different hats in my career when it comes to tackling equity gaps, from the development of the products all the way to the deployment of these products and its impacts, but also most crucially, I think the composition of the teams that I've built and the cultures that are created through a more diverse set of people working on these problems together. I think that the hardest part about doing this work is that if you don't make diversity, equity, inclusion your top priority, it's just not a priority. And so there are necessary trade-offs that need to be made. When I think about some of what I was working on the sharing economy and developing new markets, which is what I'm most interested in, how do we think about shifting the norms so that work becomes more flexible and adjustable for people's schedules? To the work I'm doing now at Google DeepMind and thinking about how we apply AI to solve some of society's greatest challenges like climate change and drug discovery, which we desperately need, where science is at the heart of those things, and how we think about applying AI to them. When I look at the scope of the challenge, the reality is that there is this huge risk in AI of perpetuating existing bias and inequities, and that comes down to a number of different questions. What challenges are we going to solve, in what order? Who gets access to the technology first? What is the benchmark and reference point of which we're building this technology? Judy, you mentioned how, in healthcare, our standard for what is healthy is still a cisgendered white man. And so how do you think at a company like Google DeepMind about increasing diversity and inclusion across the life cycle of the company and really thinking through a lot of these challenges, especially when your existing workforce does not necessarily reflect the people you want to serve? A lot of the work I've done there in the past year especially has been focused on whose voices aren't at the table. So we've hosted roundtables with partners who were kind enough to be able to curate the right sets of people around a room to input into the process of building and deploying our technologies, from disability groups all the way to artists. And when I also look at what drives the market and the norms and the hype cycles, it does still come back to VC. Even in AI, the reason there's such a hype cycle around AI is because there's so much money going towards it right now in the VC industry. And I will say, as an angel investor, I only invest in women, non-binary, and people of color as founders because I want to see people building on their lived experiences for their communities. And what you see is the opening up of new markets. So one of the companies I've invested in is called The Lowdown, which you all may have heard of, but it basically started by aggregating birth control experiences, contraceptives among women. Turns out none of that existed. The data wasn't official. So you would think that after this many years of contraceptives being in the market, that we would have actual data on this, but it didn't exist. So now there's a platform for that. And I've also invested in a company called Juniper, among others, that focuses on eating disorders, which obviously plagues people of all different backgrounds, but predominantly is reported by women. You would be surprised to find that the NHS's prescription for dealing with eating disorders is Weight Watchers coupons today. So it just shows the amount of value that can actually be created when we put investment in the market towards actual innovation. And it's not that there isn't value or need in these areas. It's that we're not thinking about whose problems come first and thinking about who will solve them. And so when I think about founders at the seed and pre-seed stage, which I'm grateful to Atomico for sponsoring me to work on, I think about the fact that you're not actually investing in a business model at that point. It's way too early. What you're investing in is the founder. So what you think about is, who is this founder? Are they investable? Can they surf what's going to come at them in terms of changes that are inevitably going to happen? You're going to have to fix the product. You're going to have to change your audience. You have to change your metrics. And I'm wondering why so much of the funding still goes to all-male founding teams to solve a breadth of challenges that exist in the world. Even the founders that I see coming out of places like Google DeepMind, where there are so few women and they're so unique and amazing, the women with the same exact credentials as the men leaving DeepMind to create their own companies have a much harder time getting funding. And sometimes, and most of the time I would say actually, it's because they're solving harder problems in places like mental health, women's health, where they're not sure what the market looks like just yet. And other people are going after very predictable markets. So I think we were talking backstage about growing the pie. I think there are new markets to be found, but it will take policy change, changes in how we invest, and also social change to figure out how to stand them up.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll go next. Good morning, everyone. Ladi, Greenstreet, co-CEO of Diversity VC. And Diversity VC really exists to unlock the full potential of venture capital for all people. And what do I mean by that? I think the full economic potential of venture capital for all people. And so we're really focused on advancing DEI because we think that's the way to get better business outcomes and societal change. I think all the evidence shows that more diverse teams, we see it in all the reports, generate better outcomes and better returns for fund managers. And so we are doing so because we believe it has a societal impact, but actually also an economic impact for not just the fund managers, but for our whole economy as for the UK. And the main things we do are focused on, one, the data. So we also have data reports, as you mentioned, and we look not just at the demographics, because since 2016 we've been doing this, and unfortunately when you look at gender or across all the different intersectionalities, change isn't really happening that fast enough. But what we do see is that we see the sentiment has changed and the will to do something things are starting to move. And so not only do we track the overall demographics, but we also look through our communities, what people are actually doing, why isn't change happening fast enough? And so our latest data report that was launched late last year looked at the sentiment between the privileged white males, which make up the majority, compared to other demographics. The privileged white males think that enough is happening within their funds. Their funds, when asked the question, is your fund doing enough to advance DEI? They say, yeah, we are. But again, obviously, I see by the smiles in this room, you ask other people and they say clearly not. And so obviously there's cognitive dissonance within the ecosystem, and that's one of the things that we try and address. So we have our data reports being one of the main levers. We also have a community, and so, as I say, we're a global not-for-profit. We operate across all regions of the world, working with the VCs, and all together we have roughly around 100 VCs that we have worked with. Now, this isn't just a community of the willing, per se, or people of science were a pledge. These are people who have taken accountability for driving action. And that's the second main pillar of our work, is that we have set what we call the diversity VC standard, which is identifying what a good DEI strategy looks like. And I think if we look at the challenges around DEI and how that's become in some circles a toxic word, I think a lot of the way to combat that is by showing that DEI really works to drive economic outputs and societal change. And here's how you do it right. This is a professionalized, standardized way of implementing DEI. And so we built a knowledge base of interventions that we've taken from across all of the 100+ funds that we work with, understanding the DEI strategies that they've implemented, seeing what works, and then bringing that forth and spreading that across our community. And so the second piece is a standard, and the third piece is looking at a pathways program for diverse talent. And so we have a program called Future VC, where we give new and emerging talent their first jobs in venture capital, diverse talent their first jobs in venture capital. And it's a completely free program for anyone to access. And we have that across the States, as well as South America and Europe. And so between that, diversity VC, I think we're really trying to address two key elements. On one side, you have the diversity through getting more talent through the door and having more diverse check writers, because we know that if you have more diverse check writers, you will have more diverse people being funded. But there's also the inclusion. You can change the look and the way the VC industry looks, but if the culture itself is still biased, nothing's going to change. And so it's really important to address this systemic bias, both cultural bias that exists within venture capital, and that's what our standard is there to do, to look at systemic bias that's happening within the fund, to address that head on, and therefore, between everything we do, start to get the better outcomes which we all hope for, which are more diverse founders being funded.
Thank you very much. I mean, actually, I was going to ask about cultural resistance, so I might go straight to that, because, I've just been reading the Treasury Committee report on sexism in the city that was launched on International Women's Day. And they talk a lot in that report about what they call a cultural deficit, that the hardest thing really to shift is culture. And I was also interested, given the work you've all been doing, that they certainly comment or worry about the extent to which data reporting can be a tick box exercise. That's what they say in there, and very much sort of say that actually, data transparency maybe isn't the key thing. And I was very struck that we all think that it is key. And I know that I read your comments to the Treasury Committee on Venture Capital, where you very much kind of stress how important data transparency is for behavioural change. And in your report, you talk about that as well. I mean, I wonder if you could address a little more the issue about to what extent data transparency is kind of key to cultural change, or whether you think there's other levers that are stronger than that. I mean,
like all things, I think it's important when used right. So you can imagine the amount of funds ask me. I have, a portfolio with, 20% female founders in my portfolio. Am I doing a good job? And I'm like, well, a good job is the actions you've taken to get there. It's not the outcome. This data is to try and demonstrate that are you on the right path or are you not? It shouldn't be a tick box exercise, because we all know that you can fudge data. I mean, if you look at the data on female GPs across Europe, on one hand, it looks like it's going up. We're seeing more female partners in funds. But when you dig a little bit deeper, as the European Women in VC have done, you realize that there are many people who have partner titles, but are not getting carry. So it's important that you think about the actions that you're taking. That's why we stress to have a good diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. What are the right actions that you're taking? And then if you do the right things, you put the right things in, you'll get the right things out. But it's no good just to focus on the data alone. But it is important as a starting block to see what am I trying to get towards. So it's good to have a target, but not use it necessarily as a quota.
Yes, no, absolutely. I mean, if you think about women in code, which people and people here may not know what it is, but I mean, investing in code has been a very important kind of initiative designed to encourage investment in female entrepreneurs. And it commits financial institutions, the signatories, to sign up to diversity data reporting. And I wondered if the code goes kind of far enough. I mean, because it's a voluntary commitment, isn't it, I think?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, it can always go further. I think it is a voluntary commitment, but it's a pretty big signal if you volunteer to commit. That's just a starting point. I think that it does drive a lot of data, and that data is important. But I think I totally agree with Ladi that, and saying this in front of an AI audience, it's about the insight behind the data that is really important. I mean, the report you published today has, given some very stark facts. Data is fact. It's the causes behind it. And so I think encouraging more signatories, encouraging it to become market standard, encouraging sharing of best practice, which we're trying to do as we run the VC segment of the Investing in Women Code, that is the most important thing. It's about building up a head of steam. It's about making predominant what is just about acceptable at the moment. And it's not acceptable to those who are already signed up. It's far from acceptable.
I mean, I think data is important because it reveals something about structure, and structure is what creates culture. And so if you're going to go after you have to go after structural change in order to change culture. And I think there are big questions around, does the VC industry, as it's structured today, create the kind of culture we want to see? One of the big questions I've been asking myself is, does it prioritize growth at all costs, even over profit? There are lots of VC-backed companies that end up going public and then are not profitable. You'd be surprised. And so the question is, where is that value? How is that being reflected? How is that sustainable in the public markets? On average, at least in my personal experience, I think women and people of color tend to build businesses that are more sustainable, more disciplined, getting to cash positive more quickly. And on all business fronts, that should be something that is celebrated, not something that you have to artificially inflate numbers around. And so I do think it's really important to look at data because I will tell you something about a structure, and I do think there has to be structural and then cultural change that results from it.
I think the data can tell you a bit about culture as well. So if you look at the rejection rates for applicants for finance, and you break that down by gender, female applicants are more likely to get rejected. And actually that has the impact, so I'm told, of actually female founders deselecting themselves from raising finance. And that is something we've got to get over. That is a cultural thing. We've got to help them to ask for the money. And not only to ask for the money, to ask for as much money as male founders in equivalent companies ask for as well. Because the worst thing is to get enough money to kind of fail rather than enough money to succeed. And so there is an ambition issue that we've got to stoke as well and help to engender.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, just sort of, following on from that, I mean, one of our recommendations is actually to have specific pots of money set aside for diverse founders. And I wonder what you think are the best avenues for that, actually, because, I mean, it doesn't seem to be a difficult argument in terms of, for example, regional funds. You know, there are other funds that are set aside that somehow aren't problematic, but somehow making the same argument around funds for, you know, diverse founders is somehow more difficult. Sorry,
I would say I think it's important to just I think your recommendation is correct, but it's important to clarify a recommendation. I don't think it's important that we should understand that there is a need to have specific funding dedicated, especially at the grassroots level, for underrepresented founders, and that in itself will make a tremendous amount of difference. Yeah. I think it's also important to recognise that it works when that's a fun thesis, but very different when the thesis isn't around that. So I don't think for us, we need to be careful not to change or pressure venture capital to change their thesis. However, when you talk about targets and data, they should really be looking at, is your fund representative of the entire market? So whilst they may not necessarily have specific pools of capital for underrepresented founders, which is changing a whole LP commitment, they should look at the data and just look at, is my fund allocating money fairly? And that is something that all the funds should do, regardless of where they are in the cycle.
No, just interesting. In our report, we mentioned some case studies where, in Canada, in Germany, there are quite a lot of cases now where quite substantial amounts of money are being kind of set aside. So it is kind of government intervention very directly in this issue.
And I think that's appropriate. I mean, I think government exists to help with market failures, to step in. And, we also think about innovation policy as a whole. Advanced market commitments are really interesting. We use them for vaccines, we use them for climate. We can also use them for the kind of change that we want to see the investment portfolios move towards when it comes to the types of problems we're tackling. I think they're always helpful to have tax breaks, around funding.
Yeah.
Diverse founders. And then thirdly, I'm really pleased to see groups like ARIA come up, where we have basically a public VC that is dedicated to solving challenges that are market gaps. So I do think there are a number of steps that can be taken and really redirect and be intentional about how we're funding solving some of these more diverse problems and challenges.
Yeah, no, I was really struck by your comment about how do we really kind of think through alternative sets of problems, and that perhaps, some of the funding problems are to do with the kind of, the nature of the products that are being thought about, actually. And as you say, more difficult problems, not so straightforwardly solvable problems. I mean, I think about this a lot in terms of apps, and I just think, why on earth is all of this energy going into these crazy apps when we've got such social problems, and how do we kind of shift that, really? I just wanted to last year, I do want to leave a little bit of time for questions from the audience, but I just sort of wanted to, I guess, finally ask you, I mean, there's a big movement around environmental, social, and corporate governance initiatives, ESG as it's called, and we know that some places this is being met with resistance, and I just wondered if you think that's the right kind of umbrella to use for these issues, or whether there's something specific about these diversity issues that we should kind of pull out from that.
Well, look, I think that ESG covers such a huge range of issues. I mean, I think they sit comfortably in an umbrella of sustainability and inclusivity. But I think there's some very different issues in environmental factors for companies versus diversity factors for companies. So I think that there used to be something, and I'm showing my age, the Balanced Business Scorecard, which are a range of different elements that we should manage our businesses to, and it feels like that is a concept not necessarily ripe for innovation, but could be applied here.
No, my period is corporate social responsibility, so it's equivalent sort of age, actually. Did you want to comment on the ESG thing? Or?
I think it's great to have these movements that are moving towards. There's a lot of intersectionality throughout ESG, right? A lot of the climate issues that we're going to deal with are going to affect people of color first in the world. But in general, I think the question that I'm always coming back to is who are we letting fail? Because the majority of these businesses will fail. That's how startups work. And who are we giving these affordances to? We're very, very comfortable with letting certain demographics try it and then celebrate the fact that they failed, even if you're from Silicon Valley like me, where I've worked for a while. and we're very uncomfortable with the other set, and then that actually filters down into how we are funding companies and, frankly, how we approach problems. And so I think there's something to be picked up there more specifically as well.
Do you think we would have the lights up a bit? Because I'd like to open it up to a couple of questions, and I can hardly see anyone here because the lights are so bright. Thank you very much. Are there some questions? And could you introduce yourself if you... Yes, sorry, there was someone at the back, and then I'll take you, yeah.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and I'm a current PhD student at Social AI CDT. And firstly, I want to thank all the speakers for their time. It was a really interesting talk. I have a directed question towards Dorothy in particular. Hi. As a woman of color to another, how did you navigate, let's say, such a culturally malnourished industry whilst maintaining your ground and finding your confidence in your voice? Thank you.
It's an amazing question. It's been hard. I think for me, it's all about building the community around you that's going to support you throughout. It's not something people can do alone. I think it's so important to have allies. I had one of the toughest conversations I've ever had to deal with in terms of a aggressive conversation coming at me when I was at a startup a couple years ago. And I came out of that and I was pretty upset, and I told my executive who I was working for, I report to women up the chain and I have women all reporting to me. I don't understand how it's going to get any better, and this is really hard. And what she said to me was, I can't actually promise you it's going to get better within your work lifetime, but I can promise that we'll do it together. Mm-hmm. And so I don't really have any, I can't give a it's going to be great talk, but I do think finding your people wherever you're going, that's been the most nourishing part of the experience, and I think has given me lifelong allies throughout my journey, and that's been the most rewarding part of the career.
Thank you, yes.
Hi, I'm Melfita, clinical researcher from university. My question is about, mentioned about growing the pie earlier, and I think that's a really important point because from discussions with colleagues, one of the main barriers of creating diverse community is that certain demographics, not all of them, worry that there's a fixed number of pies, and then you're going to take away when you give it to other underrepresented group. But actually, when you talk about growing the pie, that benefits everybody. So how do you think, practically, we can have these conversations around?
So we I get to plug my latest book. So we actually created a whole set of interventions which are all about removing barriers. This was just released last week. And so what we talk about is the fact that there are barriers to people and we're removing them, as opposed to, let's say, focusing on one group or the other and just helping them with saying that they're actually institutional barriers, let's remove them, they help everyone. And the pie gets bigger by doing so. And how we show the pie gets bigger is we've shown other funds who have improved their various metrics, be it how founders perceive them, or be it how they get hired. Things that economically for funds are really, really beneficial. We show them that these things improve. And so I think it all comes down to demonstrating with real world examples and data that these interventions help people, but help your business performance as well as society altogether. And I think we should all focus much more on what works, as we talked about. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Was there someone at the back? Yeah?
Thank you. Neil Taylor from MasterCard. Practical question. If we want to sort of rebalance or put our investment towards funds that are investing in women-owned or founded AI businesses, from a practical perspective, how do we go about identifying those funds?
Well, there are funds that, that have an inclusivity focus. Ada Ventures, for example, is one of those funds. I think increasingly it's relatively rare, not exceptional, that individuals invest in venture capital funds directly. They're generally going in through other fund managers. And I think we can have a greater greater level of interest in where our money's being put to work and being able to understand whether the manager who's managing our money is looking out for whether the fund managers they're placing money with actually have sensible policies and responsible policies around this area. So those three recommendations from our report, we now have embedded into our investment committee process. So we find out about the diversity of the investment team. We look at their track record on the funds or the investments they've made, and we require them to report to a set of metrics. And that's the start of it. So I think we need to be we need to demand a bit more.
Yes. Yes, no, I was just reading a report, a government report on gender and patents, actually, and it was a sort of historical study. And I mean, there's lots of problems with the measure of patents, as we all know, historically and in a contemporary way. But I mean, it was just very striking how few, you know, how male-dominated patents were here, you know, globally. And again, you just think, well, what are the paths not taken? You know, what are the kind of ideas that were never kind of, you know, taken up historically, that we might have constructed a very different world than we're living in now, you know.
Or who hasn't been cited.
Sorry?
Or who hasn't been cited in the patent.
Well,
yes.
Thank you so much for the discussion. That was really interesting. My name is Jennifer. I work in the sustainable finance industry. I would like to ask each of you, including Judy, to comment on you know, the intersection between women and AI. What would be the one opportunity that you're most excited about or you would like to see the most in terms of either how women can best solve a really serious AI problem or vice versa, how AI can solve gender equality problem?
Wow. I'm going to go quite parochial to the bank. I mean, I think that AI has the power to surface issues and give us insights around where good practice is and where it's not. And we need to tap into that a lot more. The other thing is we have something called the Finance Hub, which is where entrepreneurs can find out what finance they need and where to get it. And I think that AI can help to drive people better through that journey. And I would hope that that would increasingly allow female founders and other diverse founders to get what they need.
I mean, it's a very hard question, but I guess I sort of think that, you know, wouldn't it be wonderful if AI actually delivered the objectivity and neutrality that it promises? You know, wouldn't it have been fantastic if hiring software would have done the magic trick, or, you know, or in the criminal justice system or any of these other areas that we know these automated systems are being kind of rolled out, if actually, you know, the promises were fulfilled. And, you know, my hope would be that maybe, you know, these systems might deliver more, I mean, objective is the wrong word because we know there's social biases in all of these things, but more equitable outcomes, let me put it that way.
I really hope more women are inspired to get more involved with AI in general. I think I get nervous around too much techno-solutionism, I would say.
Yep.
And so, you know, I think about AI, what we're working on at DeepMind and speeding up science in particular, and how much that can do in an area like women's health that's been so neglected. But I think that will take women getting more involved in the sector, especially on the application side and choosing where to place our bets. You know, I'd love to see it. A lot of the data that we have out there right now, existing in medical fields, is actually just not formatted properly. What if we could collect data for the first time in women's health and format it correctly and get to the applications much more quickly? Like that's my hope, I think. And hopefully that'll be achieved.
I mean, I think you've said it. I think it is about getting involved, and I do have a bit of a fear that as much as AI has the power to democratize access and opportunity for all people, we are getting to the stage where there is a bifurcation between those who have or involved in AI and those who aren't. And even if you look at who is getting the chips from NVIDIA, there's a very few companies that are getting the latest chips, and who are those companies made up of? Who are they run by? So I think we are at a point where we all need to lean in to AI and realize that this is something for all of us, and we need to take control. I think government has a huge role to play for that, so I'm pleased they're leaning in. But it takes, I think, to Dorothy's point, I think it takes all of us to lean in and realize that there's a role, because it's not just the technical aspect of AI, it's the social aspect and how it implies. And we have so much bias in our society that might just be reinforced if we don't all take this opportunity to really make a change.
Thank you very much. I can see that I'm being told that the session has to close. I really wanted to thank our speakers for a great session, and I hope we can continue the conversation, because there is so much expertise and thinking about these areas that we can be part of kind of, pushing this forward. So please join me in thanking the panellists.